Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. First of all, a special thank you and a big shout out to Daniela Muente. And she listens to the show in the Netherlands and even uses our Spotify playlist to accompany her on her run. So a huge thank you to Daniela, not just for listening and for sending in your kind words, but for connecting, because it is my goal to connect with each and every one of you listening out there. That is why I do this. I share my insights, I get a guest on here to share theirs, but you and your experiences, and I mean each and every one of you, wherever you're listening in the world, you all bring tremendous value to this podcast, and it's the reason that I turn up every day in your podcast feed and record an episode. So please, if you are a long-time listener, connect with me directly on LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, Twitter at Neil C. Hughes, or you can message me through my website at techblogwriter.co.uk. But on with today's episode, and with nearly half of Americans currently working from home and an additional 20% expected to remain that way in the future, the challenge of remote authentication has never been more important. And replacing passwords and updating software are arguably no longer enough, as those lines between how work and personal life and security posture and data subsequently becomes more of a risk. So Eric Brown at SAIC, he urges that with this change, there's going to be a need for organisations to recalibrate their approach to authentication. So I invited him on the podcast to learn more and ask him to share his insights. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to sunny Florida so we can speak with Eric right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Eric. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Eric Brown. I am the Director of Enterprise Identity and Access Management at SAIC. Sounds like a lot, but really it is everything identity related, both privileged accounts and standard identities, single sign-on, PKI, email encryption, and multi-factor authentication. I've been doing it here for about 6 years now. It's been a very fun ride, and I really look forward to evolving it to the next level as we move forward in this remote journey.
I'm going to love digging a little bit deeper into all of that in a few moments. But before we do, I want to try and take you back to where it all began and ask you to share your origin story with us today. So can I ask what it was that put you on this path of securing identities while also balancing simplified user experience and your love of technology? Where did it all begin?
Well, it all began a little bit simple. I've not always been on the identity path. I actually started out doing automation control for different types of systems. I was about 14 years old when my dad first brought me into it. But I started writing strategies, as they were called then, for SCADA systems. And it was very interesting as I got into it. My disposition of being logically minded lent itself very well. So I was doing things like produce, animal feeds, refrigeration control, all sorts of interesting stuff when it came to automation. So I guess the early stages of RPA, where it was a little bit more manual. Then it evolved into remote control of these systems back when modems were just a thing evolving to the regular public. I remember the old 600 baud modem that was an ISA card that I had to put in my computer. But really, it just started evolving there. Eventually, it went from there to moving on to companies and thin clients, having remote access through that, building dealer services for one of the biggest dealer conglomerates in the United States, JM Family, and moved on to HR systems when I moved up to the Orlando area. This was all in South Florida. Then after that, I got into a little bit of redaction, which started to prepare me for government work, which is what I do today at SAIC. just working on with the defense contractors and other defense systems. It's very, very interesting. And it's been a really fun ride. I guess when I really got into identity was back in the dealer services. That's when SAML frameworks were just emerging. And I found it very interesting the way you can control access both with your on-prem directory services and then an external provider that would allow you to trust identities from another system. So very interesting ride, and it's been very, very fun.
Yeah, it has been a cool ride for you. And in your role now here in 2021, you are helping to advance the power of technology and innovation to serve and protect our world. But for people that are tuning in and hearing about SAIC for the very first time, and they could be listening anywhere in the world, could you tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you set out to solve with your technology here?
So the biggest thing is some of our client base is both federal and civil government entities, but it really is a challenging perspective. We see all the different breaches that are happening today, from JBS to the Colonial Pipeline breach. And, those are telltale signs that there's a lot to do on the identity side. And that's the challenge we face every day at SAIC. Primarily, I work with different sectors to help secure their systems that are used for design and management of defense systems, healthcare. It's very interesting, and it's a dynamic that is quite scary at times because you're always wondering, do I have an open door somewhere, and how do I close it? And that's where reliance on my team really comes in. They're experts at what they do, and I'm more of the figurehead with a little bit of a brain. These guys are geniuses that can find a needle in a haystack in a matter of seconds. So that really is the biggest thing that we work on with our technology, is how to secure the front door from these attacks, and then the rest of the team just stands behind the door and is constantly looking and surveilling the building, so to speak, to make sure that it remains secure.
And before we started recording today's podcast, we were talking a little bit about just how much life has changed and how it's going to continue to change as we move forward. But I'm curious, do you think that replacing things like passwords and updating software is just no longer enough, as those lines between work, personal security, posture and data, it all becomes more of a risk, and those lines have all become blurred now? What do you think on that topic?
I'm going to have to fully agree with you, Neil. I mean, it's just that work personal balance is really blurring. We're all working from home now, so it gets tough to remember all the different passwords that you have for all the different systems. So users do what users are going to do. They're going to look for simplification. So they start reusing passwords, sometimes reusing the same ones they use for work. And that's very dangerous when it comes to social engineering. So one of the biggest things that luckily we had deployed in preparation for compliance was multi-factor authentication. We had that deployed well ahead of the pandemic, and that has helped us thwart quite a bit of attempts to get into that front door. So it also helps us with that blurred line. If you reuse the same password on your personal side, while we don't recommend it, MFA gives us that extra level of protection that says, are you really this person, or did you just find out their password because you mined their social media profile?
I'm curious, again, from the conversations that you're having with your customers, is there a realization that the challenge of remote authentication has never been more important, or are people finally waking up to that now?
I think we've been waking up to it for a while and just been very resistant. But again, with Colonial Pipeline and these breaches more recently, even SolarWinds, it's all really tied back to an account that hasn't been secured with MFA that would have potentially thwarted the breach at the front door. That's from my understanding from the briefs I've gotten, that's how SolarWinds happened. They got in through a back door, embedded their code in SolarWinds, and it started to spiral from there. Colonial Pipeline was an unsecured service account that someone used to gain access to the VPN and started to move laterally there. So it really is, companies have started to come to that realization, and some of them are behind the game, but quickly catching up. Others have been right there in step, and we're trying to help each other as we go along. I've had several colleagues reach out and ask me, what have we used for securing with MFA, why we chose what we did. And we've partnered up with some really good technology out there. I won't really mention their names because that probably would give a little bit too much of how we secure everything, but we've got good partners that we work hand in hand with to maintain that security and stay on that cutting edge.
And for any business leaders that are listening to our conversation today, what do you think the secret is to securing identities while also balancing that simplified user experience? Because it is such a fine balancing act, isn't it?
It is. And I would say the very first thing is get a pulse from your users. Find out what their tolerance is for inconvenience, because MFA was made to be disruptive, but that doesn't mean it has to be 100%. We can make it user-friendly while still introducing that disruption that helps thwart the bad guys. So listening to your users and then laying out a good strategy for your multi-factor authentication, I think, would be key in securing those identities.
And what would you say are the biggest lessons that you've learned with SAIC as the company has transformed to a remote workforce? Because again, we're now talking about heading towards a hybrid workforce, but most of the world had to adjust to being a remote workforce almost overnight, didn't it?
It did. And I think that it was key to really learning to listen to the users. That was something I struggled with for a very long time. And I started to realize it here at SAIC as dealing with a much larger user base, and then the dynamic workforce working at customer sites, restricted sites where you couldn't take certain devices in. That really took a shift in mindset from IT knows what's best to listen to your users. They know what they need to do and work to create a strategy that allows them to do their jobs while maintaining security. And that's the mindset that I had to take personally. And I think that that's something that everyone needs to take as we move forward, because in this new dynamic remote world, it is just the way to go. Your users have a job to get done, and they need to maintain their efficiency, but you need to maintain security as a professional. So they have to go hand in hand, the feedback from the users and then applying a strategy that makes sense.
And just to bring to life everything that we're talking about here, can you walk me through possibly how your multi-factor authentication platform for remote employees actually works, by maybe sharing a few use cases that will just resonate with listeners and help them understand how it could work in their world?
Sure. So the biggest change that we've had is migration to the cloud. Cloud services bring to light a framework that allows us to deliver applications to our users from anywhere at any time. So that really is one of the things that I don't know quite how to put it, but that really is the experience that we're in today. So that use case is probably the most important. And as we move forward, it really was how do we extend our presence into the cloud, stay secure, and meet compliance. And I think that was the challenge that we have today. And we successfully did that. We're in the midst of a huge migration right now for cloud services, and our users have seen very little disruption. Primarily, our email system is moving to the cloud. We devised a way to keep it protected with multi-factor authentication, which we were doing before, but really move it seamlessly into the cloud, both for on-prem users and for remote users. So that's a really big use case. And when you're looking at someone that's trying to access their email from, let's say, an airport, it could be a little bit challenging if you have to have, either tokens or cards or, all sorts of codes. So we partnered with a company that helps us deliver this through a mobile application. So now you can be on your mobile phone. You will try to access your email through a web application, and you would input your multi-factor PIN that would show up as a push notification on your phone. You accept it, and then you switch right back to your web browser, and now you're into your system. So it really does make it a little bit easier when you can do it all with one hand while you're walking through an airport. And I think that was the biggest use case that resonated with our users. Now it's not airports. Now they're, just trying to get in some exercise as they're, quarantined at home, but they may go for a walk to get some fresh air and, get their heart pumping. But now you can actually do work while you're on the go, one-handed, and I think that's been one of the biggest use cases, is that mobility that we've given our users in the past year that has just skyrocketed in use.
As I said a few moments ago, we were talking about how 12 to 18 months ago, so many businesses all over the world had to adjust to remote working. And then it kind of switched to, we've mastered remote working, but how do we make it better? How do we make it possible to work from anywhere and any device while removing a few of those issues? And I think as we speak today, a lot of businesses are going to be talking about hybrid working and how they adjust to that. So what's next for you guys? How are you evolving and adapting, and what excites you about the road ahead and the role that you'll be playing in that future too?
So it is really, really exciting. And like I've said before, we've partnered with some really good vendors that are helping us in this journey. And I think one of the things that probably will be the next step in transformation as it comes to identity and access is wearable MFA. We're partnered with a couple of companies that are exploring the technology, but I think that would really change the dynamic again. Right now, as I mentioned in the use case, you do have to switch screens. As we go to wearable MFA, things like biometrics come into play. So you can unlock credentials by wearing your watch, for example. It will recognize you as a warm heartbeat. It will understand your heart rhythm, and then it will go ahead and provide access to your credentials directly to a mobile device or a computer without having to input anything. It's just all there. And that really does meet your multi-factor, because you've got a biometric and you've got MFA, you're wearing your watch. That's the device that you have. So now you've met that without even having to have any user interaction, just by being who you are and having what you have. I think that's the next exciting evolution for our users, when they can walk up to their phone and be able to securely send emails or access a customer database to be able to do their work remotely and not have to remember, what's my PIN? Did I change my PIN last week? Did I forget my phone? You're typically always wearing your watch, and that's why it makes it so convenient.
Love that. Incredibly exciting road ahead for you guys. And we began our conversation today talking about your origin story and the ride that you've been on. And I'd like to finish by asking a question I always ask my guests, and that is about the soundtrack to your life. And if there was a particular song or piece of music that has accompanied you throughout your career in tech, or just helps you get your head in the zone before going on stage to deliver that keynote or land a big meeting. Is there a particular song that means anything to you that we can add to our playlist?
So that's a very interesting one. I typically relate my life to movies. I've always done that. I guess that's the way my brain categorizes information. But more recently, I have gotten into music as something that helps keep me focused. And I think the one that resonates the most, it's the soundtrack from Tron Legacy by Daft Punk. That was a beautiful score of music. And I think that the track that itself that probably gets me into the zone would be the end of line track from that soundtrack.
What a great choice. I'll add that to the playlist. You've kind of got me intrigued though now. What movie would you choose if I was to ask you that one?
If it was a movie, I'm going to have to go with Hackers back from the 90s with Angelina and Johnny Lee Miller. Great movie.
Yeah, that was a good one. Oh, excellent. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. Before I let you go, for anyone who wants to find out more information about SAIC, how they can contact your team, what's the best starting point for that?
Sure. I would say the best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. You can search for me as Eric Brown, and I'm at SAIC. So you should be able to find me rather easily. And then there's our company website. If you want to find out more about what we do, is www.saic.com.
Well, I've loved hearing more about your story, the journey that you've took, and also for discussing the lessons learned with SAIC and as the company's transformed to that remote workforce, and including key takeaways related to your multi-factor authentication platform for remote employees and where you're going to go from here. All incredibly cool stuff. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today.
No problem. And thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So a huge thank you to Eric for taking the time to come on here to share his insights and help everyone listening understand how to secure identities, but while balancing that simplified user experience. And that balance can be so difficult to get right. And I also thank him for sharing his lessons that he's learned at SAIC as the company transformed to a remote workforce, and of course those key takeaways related to their multi-factor authentication platform for remote employees. Lots to go at, and I think much of the conversation will relate to so many people listening around the world. And this is where, as I said at the very beginning, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your insights, your experiences. And you can do all that by simply emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or drop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. So a huge thank you for listening as always. I hope you would come and join me again tomorrow. We'll do it all again. But thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.